Good afternoon, I'm Dennis Vittorian, and this is the 25th hour helping you remember everything that happened beyond the 24/7 news cycle. Now, in this week's news for the week of May 9th to 15th, 2021, New York City mayoral candidates square off in their first of 3 debates. Cuomo's accusers are subpoenaed to testify under oath. The CDC lifts an indoor mask mandate for fully vaccinated people. An important pipeline was hacked. A new Israeli-Hamas war knocks Biden off his feet. Liz Cheney was officially ousted as number 3 in the House GOP. And a January 6th commission is finally being formed. Now onto the show. Things may have changed by the time you hear this. Starting with de Blasio. While the city's vaccination rate increases and the virus positivity rate decreases, it's still concerning which members of the city's population aren't getting vaccinated, even without at least one dose. More than 60% of New York City nursing home facilities haven't gotten vaccinated, and on top of that, refuse to get the vaccine, which is concerning as they take care of the city's most vulnerable to illness. Representatives say that the lack of vaccinations is due to the large minority population of the workers who react suspiciously from government public health campaigns due to a history of experimentation on minority communities. Meanwhile, only 41% of MTA employees are vaccinated with at least one dose, and the agency is having a hard time getting its workers vaccinated even with the incentive of receiving a free 4-hour pay to go get a shot. With some subway stations also acting as temporary vaccination centers, the city is hoping to turn that tide around. The numbers show promising results with people flocking to stations acting as temporary vaccination centers. The city is also continuing to give away freebies to those who got vaccinated as an incentive to get the hesitant to get their shots, including tickets to Lincoln Center, the Brooklyn Cyclones, the Bronx Zoo, the Botanical Gardens, and more. De Blasio said that the city is taking new CDC guidance allowing fully vaccinated people to shed their masks in most indoor settings under advisement, as the surprise guidance from the CDC created more questions and set up the city to make decisions about how to set new COVID policies and safeguard against future outbreaks. The endorsements in the mayor's race continue. Yang was endorsed by Asian Congresswoman Grace Meng, adding another New York Asian politician to Yang's list of endorsements, leading him to potentially becoming the first Asian mayor of New York City. Eric Adams was endorsed by the New York Post, with the conservative tabloid saying they were swayed by Adams' focus on combating crime. Former Sanitation Commissioner Catherine Garcia received her biggest endorsement this week from the New York Times, holding up her level of experience in city bureaucracy and her ideas as a big reason why she should be elected. Part of the Times endorsement process was to ask the candidates what they thought the median price for a home was in Brooklyn, with Yang guessing it on the nose for $900,000, with candidates like Sean Donovan and Marie McGuire guessing lower than $100,000. Donovan's answer was most curious as he was Obama's former Housing and Urban Development Secretary. The major teachers' unions, the American Federation of Teachers and the United Federation of Teachers, are continuing to keep their endorsements for Comptroller Stringer, even in light of his recent sexual assault accusations by Gene Kim, with more liberal allies calling out the speed with which endorsees abandoned Stringer without looking into Kim's inconsistencies in her story. 8 of the Democrats leading the mayoral primary had the first out of 3 debates sponsored by New York One. The candidates included Yang, Adams, Garcia, Morales, Stringer, McGuire, Donovan, and Wiley. The debate saw the first time candidates really went after one another face-to-face, although the debate took place over Zoom, with many taking shots at Yang, who responded in more conciliatory tones. Wiley and Adams went after one another, with the former attacking the latter's past as a Republican. McGuire delivered a zinger against Donovan, referring to the latter's father, bankrolling a super PAC in his support, and Stringer still being dogged by sexual assault accusations.
Yeah, I'm a 6'4", 200-pound black man. I want to have the police protect me and not profile me.
With the Times Square shootings and ever-increasing gun violence and subway crime dominating the headlines, it was no big surprise that in their first major debate, the 8 leading Democratic mayoral contenders tried to either defend the cops or defund them.
We actually need to recognize that police respond to crime. They don't prevent crime.
The division pronounced when the candidates were asked if they would send more cops to police the subways. Only half the candidates raised their hands. The sharpest exchange between defund the cops proponent Maya Wiley attacking former cop Eric Adams, implying he supported the controversial stop, question, and frisk policies.
How can New Yorkers trust you to protect us and to keep us safe from police misconduct?
Every time you raise that question, it really just shows your failure of understanding law enforcement.
Having chaired the New York City Civilian Complaint Review Board, I certainly understand misconduct.
I told everyone at the beginning of the race, once candidates start getting desperate, it's going to get really nasty.
There were a number of embarrassing questions. Why, for example, did Andrew Yang fail to vote in mayoral elections?
I've certainly been active in other ways. I helped swing those 2 state races in Georgia.
Sean Donovan was asked about the propriety of his dad running a super PAC that has poured millions of outside money into his campaign.
There are dozens of these groups supporting almost every candidate that's in this race. And in fact, Scott Stringer had 17 of these groups when he ran for comptroller in 2013.
Don't get me
But
involved in your
be
daddy's
clear.
problems.
Bringing back the economy was another important topic, Catherine Garcia pointing out that the pandemic has forced many women to stop working.
Which is why we need free childcare for those who are making under $70,000 a year.
Wiley confronted with the fact that she worked for Bill de Blasio.
I quit 5 years ago.
Yang, for his part, is still probably feeling pretty confident as another poll has him at the top of the pack again with support from 21% of respondents from the Show and Cooperman research survey. Adams is back in second place with 17%. Scott Stringer's sexual assault accuser Jean Kim gave an interview with the New York Times outlining different instances of Stringer's alleged assault against her, including in taxis where he would unwantingly kiss and grope her and constantly asked him if he wanted to make phone calls for her to advance her career or give her political positions. Stringer continues to deny the accusations that he assaulted Kim when she volunteered on his 2001 campaign for Manhattan Borough President, saying that they had an on-again, off-again relationship. After a shooting that occurred in Times Square and injured 3 people, including a 4-year-old child, mayoral candidates sparred with one another over how to handle the NYPD budget and take on the city's safety after an increase in gun violence. Adams, a former cop, hit Yang and Wiley for their policies against defunding the NYPD, with Yang saying that's not what he plans to do at all, and Wiley defending her stance to reorganize the budget. Even de Blasio came out after the shooting promising an increased police response, deploying critical response officers to tourist spots throughout the city. The shooter himself was captured this week by federal authorities working together with the NYPD in Florida. Meanwhile, Adams' fellow mayoral contenders are pushing back against the Brooklyn borough president by highlighting his early years as a former registered Republican for 7 years from 1995 to 2002, as well as his role approving slot machines while he was a state senator, a brief controversy that surrounded Adams' role in a possible pay-to-play scheme with lobbyists. Garcia, Donovan, and Wiley came out with their own detailed proposals about how to handle increased gun violence in the city, with Garcia saying that she'll increase gun buyback rewards to $2,000, Donovan saying he wants the DAs to expedite gun cases, and Wiley emphasizing the appointment of a civilian police commissioner. Yang caught some attention for another scenario where he put his foot in his mouth, this time around the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. After tensions flared up again between Israel and Gaza, Yang tweeted out his support for Israel without mentioning anything about Palestinians, which set off a sizable group within his own campaign and his base of support. Yang issued another tweet saying his detractors were correct to call out his lack of attention to Palestinians, but didn't apologize for what he said was a simplification of a complex issue. Yang has nearly unanimous support from the city Orthodox community for his mayoral campaign. Yang had earlier been disinvited from a Queens Muslim Ramadan event for his tweet supporting Israel and was blasted online by Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Senator Bernie Sanders. The City report also showed that a slight majority of Yang's contributors, 58%, are from outside of the 5 boroughs, with most of the zip codes giving the largest share of donations residing in Jersey or Westchester County. The City Board of Elections have greenlighted early voting polling places for the June 22nd primaries in the city, including the Met, beginning on June 12th. And while the primary is a few weeks away, the City Board of Elections is still waiting for the state board to approve software that would tabulate ranked choice voting results. The special elections that utilized the ranked choice method prior had to be counted by hand. An investigation concluded by the city also found that the City Board of Elections mix-up of sending faulty absentee ballots for thousands of voters in Brooklyn in the 2020 presidential election didn't include foul play, but the board won't be including and printing out those ballots this time around. Former Police Commissioner Ray Kelly endorsed Liz Crotty for Manhattan DA this week, with Crotty representing a traditional law and order policy platform compared to her more progressive candidates. Kelly was commissioner under Bloomberg and oversaw stop and frisk. Council Speaker Corey Johnson got a high-profile endorsement for his bid to replace Scott Stringer as comptroller from the United Federation of Teachers, the main teachers union in New York City, glazing over fellow councilman in the race, Brad Lander. Following Cuomo's announcement that CUNYs and SUNYs will require their students to be vaccinated in order to attend in-person classes, de Blasio announced that children and teachers in New York City public schools won't be required to get vaccinated, but that he had confidence that staff and students would get their shots regardless, and that schools have been proven to be safe environments amidst the pandemic.
And now we have the ability to reach hundreds of thousands more New Yorkers, amongst our youngest New Yorkers. They are the future of the city. We want them to be safe. So we're really happy that the FDA has authorized Pfizer for 12-year-olds, 13-year-olds, 14-year-olds, and 15-year-olds. And the CDC is meeting today. We are thoroughly convinced that they will support this effort and approve the ability to go ahead with Pfizer vaccines for young people.
After a number of middle schools suspended the use of admissions screening as a criteria for whether or not to accept new students because of the pandemic, it turns out that ending the practice allows for more low-income and ESL students to be accepted to schools that are normally too competitive to include them. The city has some questions to answer after a report released by the publication The City revealed a multi-million-dollar deal to rehabilitate a 14,000 square foot office for a Department of Health and Mental Hygiene diversion center never came to fruition 4 years after signing the contract. Another center in Harlem that actually did start accepting people only has 45 individuals, which would come at a cost of $1.1 million per person. The contracts are part of Biden's wife Charlene McRae's mental health program Thrive, which is under controversy for spending $1 billion without any results. Thrive was renamed recently as the Mayor's Office of Community Mental Health. A health department spokesman told the city that it plans to reopen the Bronx location later in the year and that more people are set to participate in the centers under a new mental health emergency response pilot program. The Taxi and Limousine Commission said that the city's taxis are increasing and are back on the streets again after the pandemic decimated their numbers, pointing to the increase of taxis entering inspection facilities in Queens. Mayor de Blasio announced that 45 miles of streets throughout the city will have their speed limits decreased as an extension of his Vision Zero program, which had already lowered the citywide speed limit to 25 miles per hour. The mayor did this after riding a city bike from Gracie Mansion to City Hall, becoming the first mayor to ride to work since Mayor John Lindsay. Councilman Joe Borelli, Republican from Staten Island, was particularly upset about Highland Boulevard getting its speed limit dropped. De Blasio announced the start of Open Boulevards, an extension to the Open Streets program which blocked off roads from car traffic in favor of pedestrian plazas. This time, Operation Boulevard would open plazas to include restaurants to be able to expand their outdoor dining areas as well as give community organizations the chance to facilitate their programming out on the street. 3 police officers were arrested this week on charges that they had a kickback scheme with a tow truck business, receiving thousands of dollars in exchange for sending damaged cars from accidents to the towing company. One of the cops, Robert Smith, was recently outed as a racist in court documents. A report from the federal government concluded that the city corrections department failed to manage how staff were sent to respond to crises in jails, pointing to exorbitant overtime hours despite being overstaffed in some prisons and use of force incidents. The report was the 11th in a series of reports from court-appointed federal monitor Stephen Martin. The report came out the same day that Corrections Department Commissioner Cynthia Brand resigned her position. Before she left, Brand commented on the report's positive aspects, saying that the report showed the department investigated the use of force incidents very quickly. Meanwhile, Vincent Schiraldi, the city's former probation commissioner and director of juvenile corrections in D.C., has been chosen to replace the outgoing corrections commissioner Cynthia Brand. A slew of subway stabbings gripped the city Friday as 4 suspects were taken in for stabbings at 3 Manhattan stations, only adding to the narrative that the subway system has become more unsafe since the pandemic cleared out most commuters. New York City Transit Authority President Sarah Feinberg laid blame at Mayor de Blasio, saying that the mayor can simply place more cops in stations to prevent and deter future crimes. The Gay Officers Action League, comprised of LGBT police officers, was told by Pride Parade organizers that they're not welcome to march next year, with it being unclear as to the reason why. Over at the City Council, a week after Councilman Chaim Deutsch was pushed out of his Southern Brooklyn Council seat for pleading guilty to tax evasion, a candidate vying to replace him, Orthodox Republican shock jockey Heshi Tischler, who is against wearing masks in public, pled guilty to inciting a riot against a Jewish journalist in the midst of city pushback against Orthodox communities not respecting COVID restrictions at the height of the pandemic. Tischler has to do just 10 hours of community service, and his campaign will continue. A city council hearing looking into the NYPD's handling of protest shootings in overtime got heated, with Finance Committee Chair Councilman Daniel Drum blasting Police Commissioner Dermot Shea for spending $370 million on overtime, way over the $240 million allotted to the department for that purpose, with Shea lambasting Drum for the way the councilman spoke to him and insisting the police is still spending less on overtime than in the past 15 years. Attention was turned to the city council race to replace Bronx Councilman Fernando Cabrera, with City Limits reporting that more than $1 million amassed for the race among 6 candidates trying to win Cabrera's seat. The council voted to pass a city bill that would limit the use of single-use plastic straws in eateries, bars, groceries, and even food trucks. It would only limit giving them out to customers unless they ask for one. Single-use plastic straws have been of environmental concern for a while, contributing to the amount of plastic waste found in polluted areas. The council also passed a bill that would require e-moped companies like Revel and Lime, who are trying to break into the city market, to have their bikes approved by the City Department of Transportation before they could be allowed to be placed outside for New Yorkers to use. Councilman Ben Kalos introduced a bill this week that would require anyone renting out their home through Airbnb to register with the city following a period of time wherein the city forbid the use of city apartments that were otherwise being left vacant and not rented out to tenants to be listed on the home sharing site. Flood protections for low-lying Queens neighborhoods were approved by the council on Friday, greenlighting a plan called Zoning for Coastal Flood Resiliency, which updated zoning regulations to give coastal Queens residents an easier way to recover from any future flooding inspired by the devastation wrought by Hurricane Sandy years ago. Over at the Cuomo administration, turns out that it's easier to get people vaccinated when you entice them with beer. Erie County Executive Mark Pollincard said that the promise of free hops resulted in more people getting inoculated than in all of the vaccination clinics in the county. CUNYs and SUNYs are going to require their students to be vaccinated in order to take part in in-person learning, the governor announced. Cuomo also said that kids won't be required to be vaccinated before they go back to school in the fall, but with Pfizer's vaccine becoming approved by the FDA beyond emergency use, officials are hoping schools reopen faster and smoother. SUNY said it doesn't have plans to make vaccines mandatory for professors and staff this fall.
You're a young person, you go to SUNY School, State University of New York, City University of New York, you must have a vaccine to come back in September. If you must have a vaccine, get it now, if you have to get it anyway. I also encourage private schools to do the same thing. Let's make a global statement. You cannot go back to school in person in September unless you have a vaccine.
Cuomo also gave LARR and Metro North riders a chance to get their shots right at their train stations from Wednesday until Sunday, with riders getting 2 free one-way trips. A similar effort is underway in the MTA in New York City.
Wednesday to Sunday, we're offering vaccines at Subway, LIRR, and Metro North Hub. Get a shot and take a free ride on the MTA. You get a free 7-day Metro card for everyone vaccinated at a subway station, and LIRR, Metro North, 2 free one-way trips anywhere in the service area. It's Johnson & Johnson, so it's one shot. So think about this.
The governor announced that Silent Field, home to the Buffalo Bisons, would be split between vaccinated and unvaccinated spectators, with unvaccinated people having to be socially distanced in their seats, but everyone is still required to wear a mask. Following the CDC's recommendations that vaccinated people don't have to wear masks indoors, New York didn't immediately follow the guidelines, with Cuomo saying that his office is reviewing the agency's new regulations. State Comptroller Thomas DiNapoli released a new report detailing the high level of fraud that the state had to deal with as unemployment and other pandemic-related assistance rolled out, with identity theft topping the list last year. Sales tax revenues have been shown to increase in various municipalities throughout the state, another sign that New York is crawling out of the pandemic. Cuomo is not to be deterred, even though he's facing multiple investigations for his COVID nursing home death scandal and sexual assault allegations from 10 women. The New York Times published a report citing interviews with 6 people close to Cuomo who say that the governor is recalibrating his strategy to fight back against the scandals, publicly undermining the attorney general and saying he hadn't done anything wrong. The governor was again asked by reporters this week about his sexual assault scandals, this time specifically about the Assembly's impeachment investigation against him, with Cuomo simply saying, quote, "I didn't do anything wrong, period."
No, I said I never meant to make anyone feel uncomfortable. Can I finish my answer? It is after the fact, obviously. I never said anything I believe is inappropriate. You can leave this press conference today and say, oh, the governor harassed me. You can say that. I would say, I never said anything that I believed was inappropriate. I never meant to make you feel that way. You may hear it that way. You may interpret it that way. And I respect that. And I apologize to you if I said something you think is offensive.
According to the law, the harasser's intention doesn't matter.
Yes,
but apologize for if you made someone feel uncomfortable. I'm just wondering, do you acknowledge that according to the law, that doesn't matter and it would still be considered
harassment? Is not making someone feel uncomfortable. That is not harassment. If I just made you feel uncomfortable, that is not harassment. That's you feeling uncomfortable.
Cuomo also publicly still stands by his former vaccine rollout czar Larry Schwartz, who was sent packing recently after the state legislature repealed exceptions allowing volunteers with conflicts to serve in government roles to service against the pandemic. The governor said that he has total confidence in Schwartz, while the Attorney General Letitia James is investigating him for calling up county officials allegedly under the guise of checking how their vaccine rollouts are doing, while Schwartz really asked them how they felt about Cuomo as his scandals were initially erupting in full view. 4 of the women that have accused Cuomo of sexual assault were subpoenaed by the Attorney General's office, showing that Letitia James's investigation is progressing. Lindsey Boylan, Anna Liss, Charlotte Bennett, and an undisclosed woman who said she was groped by the governor at the executive mansion all said they got notices to come and testify under oath. Cuomo can now count another Republican to run against him, this time his former rival Rob Astorino, the former Westchester County executive, who had lost his bid the last time he ran against him, except there were a slew of sexual assault accusations against the governor and the number of dead from COVID hanging over him. The governor announced that the Metro North Railroad can begin rolling in trains into Penn Station through 4 new stations in the Bronx in 4 years, bringing much-needed statewide public transit infrastructure to a borough critics say is much neglected. Suffolk County Chief of Detectives Gerard Gigante, who is facing an internal affairs investigation inside the Suffolk County Police Department regarding allegations of a corrupt promotions process, suddenly filed for retirement. Gigante said his decision to retire was done for personal reasons. Over at the state legislature, after convicted politician Sheldon Silver was put back in prison and another politician, William Boylan Jr., was allowed to serve the rest of his sentence from home due to compassionate release, another politician was released to home imprisonment on compassionate release, but this one has been out for quite some time. Malcolm Smith, the former Senate Majority Leader, was released last year and is now allowed to serve the rest of his 7-year public corruption conviction from the comfort of his own home. In response to those trying to game the system by attaining free vaccination cards, making it look like they got their shots so that they can continue walking amongst the crowd potentially infected with COVID, Bronx Assemblyman Jeff Dinowitz introduced a bill that would make forging vaccine cards a second and third-degree forgery under the criminal code. State Senate Republicans futilely introduced a package of bills meant to protect police throughout the state and resist calls by progressive politicians to defund police budgets. The bills would increase penalties for assaults against cops and make it a crime to reveal information about a police officer, as well as criminalize making false accusations about them. A bill to make it easier for adult survivors of sexual assault to file lawsuits has advanced out of a state Senate committee called the Adult Survivors Act, which would create a one-year period to toll all statutes of limitation on sexual assault and abuse incidents. State Assembly Republicans aren't happy with the pace of Cuomo's impeachment committee in the chamber, saying the group only met twice and is not acting with the urgency the allegations against the governor require. Assembly Minority Leader William Barclay said in a statement that a straight up or down vote on impeachment would get the ball rolling faster, eschewing the actual investigation part of the committee. In the meantime, the impeachment committee in the Assembly only appropriated $250,000 towards a group of outside lawyers handling the legal work, even though that only pays for 3 weeks of the attorney's work, according to the agreement struck between the firm Davis Polk and the Assembly. Mixing a little bit of both the state's legislative and judicial sections, the state Senate passed a bill repealing the requirement that out-of-state attorneys wanting to practice in New York must have an office within the state. Over at the state judiciary, Eric Garvin, a law school graduate and a senior program manager in the Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice's Reentry and Cultural Change program, sued New York City after what he says is being sidelined for promotions and being set up to fail on account of his race, and for retaliation for giving a quote in an article in 2017 for saying that the legal industry is one of the least diverse professions in the nation. Gerald Connolly, the administrative judge for New York's 3rd Judicial District, heralded the launch of a pilot program that seeks to bring people without a home computer to file court documents electronically. 2 class action lawsuits were filed against 50 different members of the NYPD by protesters from last May's George Floyd demonstrations, alleging that the cops threw protesters into cells with other prisoners that weren't wearing masks, putting them in danger of contracting COVID, and that the protesters were arrested without justification in the first place. State court data shows that more than a third of Long Island criminal defendants are black men, and compared to the fact that there are only 2 black assistant district attorneys in all of Long Island, the island has a lot of work to do to bring equity to the prosecutorial system there. The labor union representing New York corrections officers and the Policemen's Benevolent Association sued Cuomo and the Department of Corrections to overturn the recently passed ban on prolonged solitary confinement, saying that it in fact makes prisoners more violent and thus endangers the lives of corrections and police officers in violation of the 14th Amendment. Corrections spokesman Thomas Maley said the department has proactive policies to head off assaults against officers with the disincentive of increased prison time. The whiplash one gets from the Gowanus rezoning continues as Brooklyn Judge Catherine Levine put another pause in the process until the City Planning Commission can combine virtual and in-person meetings, which must then be approved by the court. Residents sued against the rezoning plan based on the theory that the New York City Charter requires in-person meetings of the Planning Commission as part of the Uniform Land Use Review procedure. Jeff Klein, a former leader of the state Senate who now faces a sexual harassment investigation, got peppered with questions by State Supreme Court Justice Richard McNally Jr. about Klein's own legal argument as to why the investigation should be dismissed by a state ethics panel. Justice McNally is looking into the legality of the State Joint Commission on Public Ethics probe into Klein's sexual harassment allegations, with Klein saying the commission violated its own rules regarding the timeliness of their investigation. Moving on to the Biden administration. Biden aides say that the country is turning a corner with the COVID pandemic, with Biden's COVID coordinator, Jeff Zients, saying that restrictions can continue to lift as long as more people vaccinate. 58% of the U.S. population have had at least 1 dose at the start of the week. The FDA authorized the Pfizer vaccine in adolescents 12 to 15 years old after clinical trials showed promising results even better than in adults, with the move expected to make it easier to reopen schools and carry out summer events like camps. The Biden administration worked out a deal with Uber and Lyft to give people free rides if they're going to get their shots, so take advantage of a free cab ride to your local vaccination center, as it'll be free up until July 4th. A draft review of the State Department's COVID actions conducted by the department itself hits former President Trump and former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo for creating a void of international leadership at the outset of the pandemic, saying Trump's and Pompeo's withdrawal of international forums created issues for tackling the pandemic. The CDC released new guidance this week that said fully vaccinated individuals can shed their masks for all but crowded indoor settings, sending shockwaves throughout the country, and launched more questions than the guidance answered. While those who are vaccinated can breathe a sigh of relief, questions remain for those who are unvaccinated who remain maskless throughout the pandemic, masquerading as inoculated, and how businesses should now set policies to parse through those who have gotten their shots and who are faking it. CDC Director Rochelle Walensky clarified that the guidance doesn't apply also to areas of public transportation and medical settings.
This past year has shown us that this virus can be unpredictable. So if things get worse, there is always a chance we may need to make change to these recommendations. The science is also very clear about unvaccinated people. You remain at risk of mild or severe illness, of death, or of spreading the disease to others.
Biden came out to give remarks on the guidance as well, saying that better days are ahead. And reports also came out saying White House staff that were vaccinated were free to walk around without their masks in the workplace.
I think it's a great milestone, a great day. If you are fully vaccinated, you no longer need to wear a mask.
But if you've not been vaccinated, or if you're getting a 2-shot vaccine and you've not gotten you only had your first shot, but not your second, or you haven't waited the full 2 weeks after your second shot, you still need to wear a mask. Look, we've gotten this far. Please protect yourself until you get to the finish line.
Retailers such as Trader Joe's and Walmart were some of the first stores to announce that their mask mandates were being dropped, with questions still looming on how businesses plan on making sure they don't become the next pandemic outbreak. Biden met with the 4 political leaders of the House and Senate on Wednesday to talk about infrastructure, specifically House Speaker Pelosi, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Then on Thursday, Biden met with a group of Republican senators, including West Virginia Republican Senator Shelley Moore Capito, who introduced the smaller, less than $600 billion Republican counterproposal to hammer down the numbers. Biden hopes to sign the first part of his infrastructure package by Memorial Day. Despite Republican leaders saying that there's progress in the talks, the non-starter of increasing taxes that were cut by Republicans in 2017 makes things difficult and puts both sides far apart. Senate Republicans are going to reportedly give Biden their official counteroffer next week. A 5,500-mile pipeline that distributes about 45% of the eastern seaboard's gas and diesel fuel, the Colonial Pipeline, was cyber-attacked by a Russian criminal group at the start of the week, shutting down the pipeline and leading the Biden administration to issue a state of emergency declaration to help with the situation by allowing drivers to go around Department of Transportation regulations regarding how long they're able to drive for overtime hours and having less sleep for the purpose of carrying more fuel to the east. The group called DarkSide stole approximately 100 gigs of data before launching a malware attack demanding ransom money. It's not clear when the pipeline's networks were coming back online, leading to a raise in gas prices with the delay in fuel distribution. The pipeline was able to come back online days later with people nervous about rising gas prices, with southeastern states raising their own gas prices through panic buying. Colonial did end up paying $5 million in ransom money. DarkSide, the cyber criminal group responsible for the attack, announced that they were disbanding. Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm said that normal service at gas stations is likely to resume by late Sunday as gas shortages continue.
It's still going to work its way through the system over the next few days, but we should be back to normal fairly soon. People should not panic. Really, the gasoline is coming, and this hoarding issue, or if you take more than what you need, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of the shortages, as you can imagine.
The president also signed an executive order in the wake of the cyber attack directing the Commerce Department to write standards dealing with cybersecurity for companies that work with offering the government software services. The EPA moved forward to making more gasoline available in Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, and D.C. in response to the hacks, waiving restrictions on the amount of gasoline traditionally for sale until May 18th. Cyber attacks demanding ransom became a lot more visible once the dust settled on the Colonial Pipeline story, with the D.C. Police Department getting hit next from the Russian crime syndicate called the Babu Group, demanding a $4 million ransom that the department rejected. Despite the White House and Treasury Department not worrying about inflation, news reports continue to come out presenting troubling figures. Consumer prices rose 0.8% last month and 4.2% from a year ago, which was the largest monthly increase in 10 years, and there was a 10% increase reported among prices in used cars and trucks, which were in part due to a computer chip shortage. The Federal Reserve Vice Chair Richard Clarida said that he was surprised by the price increases last month, but assured that the increase was temporary and that the Fed would step in to slow inflation if necessary. Meanwhile, the Commerce Department reported that April retail sales remained flat from March at the continued rate of 10.7%, sparked by the injection of stimulus funds into the economy. Unemployment claims continued to drop, with last week's unemployment application numbers dropping to 473,000, down from a revised 507,000 the week prior, according to the Labor Department. Employers are continuing to struggle to get workers due to COVID fears, lack of childcare options, and unemployment compensation, keeping workers away from the workplace, which would traditionally pay lower wages and benefits. The Biden administration moved forward to approving the nation's first major offshore wind farm in the Atlantic Ocean just off the coast of Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts. The Vineyard Wind Project could potentially power about 400,000 homes by generating about 800 megawatts of electricity with its 84 turbines. The Environmental Protection Agency repealed a Trump-era rule that limited the EPA's own power to put regulations in place, having required the agency to make a cost-benefit analysis based on a formula that downplayed a regulation's benefit to the environment and played up the cost on business. The Associated Press reported on obtained federal government data showing that migrant children are given little oversight as they're being detained in mass shelters near the southern border, spanning 200 facilities in 24 states, with 5 shelters housing at least 1,000 kids each. The number of migrant children housed by the government doubled in the past 2 months, numbering about 21,000. Customs and Border Protection data shows that the arrests at the border rose in April to its highest one-month total in 20 years, but there have been fewer encounters with unaccompanied children. Department of Homeland Security Secretary Mayorkas testified in front of senators this week that the number of young migrants has fallen from almost 6,000 to 455, and kids who are in custody longer than the legally allowed 72 hours has also decreased from 4,078 to 0. Meanwhile, the White House rescinded a Trump-era rule that banned pandemic aid for undocumented college students, allowing them to receive federal relief grants that could go toward food, housing, and childcare. The Biden administration rescinded a Trump policy that didn't enforce gay and trans anti-discrimination laws in the realm of healthcare. Now, any healthcare policies that discriminate or ban gay or trans people is illegal, according to the Department of Health and Human Services. Thea Lee is to be named as the new Deputy Undersecretary for International Labor. Lee hails from the Economic Policy Institute, where she served as president and promoted liberal economic policies, including opposing free trade rules, and has spent 20 years at the powerful AFL-CIO union. Biden's press secretary, Jen Psaki, is reportedly considering stepping down after a year is up on the job, telling former Southern District U.S. Attorney Preet Bharara on his podcast that she wants to make way for someone else after that amount of time is up. Rahm Emanuel, Obama's former chief of staff and Chicago's former mayor, is set to be nominated by the president to become the next ambassador to Japan. Biden has also released his third list of judicial nominees to federal circuit and district courts, including public defenders and corporate attorneys. Catherine Lamon, formerly an ACLU attorney and now domestic policy advisor at the White House, has been tapped to lead the Civil Rights Office at the Department of Education, where she held the same position in the Obama administration. A new Associated Press NORC poll shows that Biden's overall approval rating stands at 63%, with 71% approving how Biden is handling the coronavirus pandemic. A new panel empowered by the Biden administration seeks to look back to 2009 to see if there was any political interference in science-based policymaking spurred on by actions taken by the Trump administration to interfere in the CDC's COVID handling and climate change action. Major labor unions AFL-CIO, SEIU, SNITIS, and the Public Citizens Global Trade Watch filed a complaint with the Biden administration saying that the Mexican Trident factories that manufacture auto parts have been breaking labor rules set by the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement inked by the Trump administration. Specifically, the unions are saying that the factories are breaking rules pertaining to management harassing and firing workers for trying to organize. Don't freak out, but maybe aliens are trying to reach out to us. A NASA spacecraft has detected a constant hum 14 billion miles from Earth, with scientists saying it's just a glimpse into what the outer space environment sounds like beyond our solar system. A Times investigation based on interviews of 20 current and former officials from multiple government agencies revealed that the mysterious brain injuries that occurred apparently from microwave-directed energy devices affected way more people than the White House let on, with the real number totaling closer to 130 people. Although intelligence sources suspect Russia is behind the attacks, they don't have a definitive source. The State Department has urged both sides in Israel and Palestine to calm down and de-escalate after tensions erupted beginning around the Muslim Ramadan holiday. Although Biden has deprioritized the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, the region has trudged on with its own set of challenges, with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu facing corruption charges and losing his chance to get a governing coalition together after a fourth consecutive election. The Israeli government limited how many Muslims can pray around the sacred Al-Aqsa Mosque on Ramadan, as is normal Israeli policy to prevent outbreaks of violence. But a domino effect spiraled into violence with the background of apparent forced evictions looming over Palestinian residents of the West Bank neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah. Palestinian terrorists from Hamas and other militant groups from Gaza launched thousands of missiles into Israel days later, escalating Israel's response with deaths now accruing on both sides, with Palestinians dying in droves. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki said that Biden is briefed daily on developments between Israel and Gaza, and the president sent a State Department envoy, Deputy Assistant Secretary for Israeli-Palestinian Affairs Hadi Amr, to Israel to help mediate the situation, as well as reassuring Prime Minister Netanyahu that Israel has U.S. support, proclaiming to the press that Israel has a right to defend itself.
There has not been a significant overreaction. The question is how we get to a point where they get to a point where there is a significant reduction in the attacks, particularly the rocket attacks that are indiscriminately fired into population centers.
While the U.S. military and non-essential personnel leave Afghanistan, attention is also being paid to the thousands of Afghan interpreters and their families that have helped the U.S. efforts over the years who had been promised visas to the U.S. in exchange for their assistance. The White House is in internal discussions about how to get the almost 17,000 Afghans out of the country, with a massive backlog almost guaranteeing a lengthy process. The U.S. State Department released an annual report on the state of the world's religious freedom, including tough words for Chinese suppression of its Muslim Uyghur population, which are placed in concentration camps and released as, quote, reformed individuals, if released at all. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that Yu Hui, a former member of the Chinese Communist Party, wouldn't be welcome into the U.S. for his role in detaining practitioners of the Falun Gong religion. Over in Congress, and starting in the House Minority Leader Republican Kevin McCarthy publicly backed New York Upstate Republican Elise Stefanik to become the next GOP conference chair, replacing Wyoming Republican Liz Cheney, who has been outspoken against Trump's continued lies about the 2020 presidential election having been rigged against him. Stefanik has taken a sharp turn as originally being a Republican who spoke out against Trump until his first impeachment, at which point she became one of his biggest public supporters. Ahead of Cheney's ouster, even fellow Republicans like Senator Joni Ernst from Iowa called it cancel culture, which is usually reserved for liberals. Cheney was eventually voted out of her position on Wednesday morning, with Cheney delivering a speech right before saying that former President Trump is on a crusade to undermine U.S. democracy, and then saying afterwards that she's going to do everything in her power to prevent Trump from becoming president again.
I will do everything I can to ensure that the former president never again gets anywhere near the Oval Office. We have seen the danger that he continues to provoke with his language. We have seen his lack of commitment and dedication to the Constitution, and I think it's very important that we make sure whomever we elect is somebody who will be faithful to the Constitution.
Following the ouster, more than 100 Republicans released a letter threatening to form a new party to counteract the official kowtowing to Trump. New York Congresswoman Elise Stefanik officially beat back fellow Republican Chip Roy to take over for Cheney later in the week in a secret vote.
I wanted to thank my colleagues for the opportunity to serve as the House Republican Conference Chair. I have prioritized listening to all members of our Republican conference, and my focus is on unity because that's what the American people and that's what our voters deserve. I also want to thank this leadership team. I look forward to working with them in partnership, shoulder to shoulder, to make sure that we are fighting on behalf of hardworking Americans. I also want to thank President Trump for his support. He is a critical part of our Republican team. I believe that voters determine the leader of the Republican Party, and President Trump is the leader that they look to. I support President Trump. Voters support President Trump. He is an important voice in our Republican Party, and we look forward to working with him.
House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer announced that the House is eyeing a vote to form the January 6th commission looking into the background of Trump's incited insurrection against Biden's Electoral College certification in Congress as soon as next week. And a deal was struck this week on how the commission would look like and operate. Disagreements between Speaker Pelosi and Minority Leader McCarthy about the makeup of the commission and its subject matter really held up its formation, with McCarthy wanting more Republicans on the committee and having the committee increase its scope to look into the Black Lives Matter protests last summer that had nothing to do with the insurrection. The commission got its vote and was officially created after hearings where Republicans tried downplaying the insurrection as being akin to a tour guide around the Capitol and still maintaining that Antifa ransacked the Capitol building instead of Trump supporters. Speaker Pelosi called the comments by Republicans sick and beyond denial, with Democrat David Cicilline moving to request the censure of Republicans Andrew Claude, Jody Heiss, and Paul Gosar for their remarks.
Sadly, yesterday there was a hearing in the Committee on Government Reform that was quite appalling. It's no use my even telling you about it. You have to see it for yourself because you would not believe that a Republican member on the committee said that what happened that day was just a normal, orderly visit of people to the Capitol. Really? Really? Well, I don't know on a normal day around here when people are threatening to hang the Vice President of the United States or shoot the Speaker in the forehead or disrupt and injure so many police officers. I don't consider that normal. Multiple people were killed, over 140 police officers were issued. A gallows was put up, and the attackers chanted, "Hang the Vice President." Normal? Yet, in a hearing held yesterday, some House Republicans defended those actions, saying the rioters were orderly and acting similar to a normal tourist visit. They basically, if you saw them, they said, well, they were just walking through between the velvet ropes that are there to direct the tourist path. You have to see it because it was beyond denial. It fell into the range of sick.
The commission is tasked with issuing a final report with recommendations to prevent future attacks on the Capitol and other institutions by December 31st, and would include 10 members, which are to be appointed by Speaker Pelosi and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, as well as House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy and the Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell. Trump's former acting defense secretary Christopher Miller testified in front of a House committee defending the military's response on the day of the insurrection, saying that he was concerned sending military to the Capitol days before the riots created an image of a coup and could end up in the deaths of protesters a la the Kent State shootings. 5 people on the day died of the riots. Republicans continue to make excuses about the day of the insurrection, with even House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy making the bold-faced lie that nobody's questioning the legitimacy of the 2020 election, even though former President Trump to this day continues to say that there was widespread fraud and that he actually won the election.
Well, first of all, the conference will decide, but I don't think anybody is questioning the legitimacy of the presidential election. I think that is all over with. We're sitting here with the president today. So from that point of view, I don't think that's a problem.
A Marine Corps officer became the first active duty service member to be charged for the role rioting at the Capitol on January 6th. Major Christopher Warnegirius from Virginia forced his way inside the Capitol and assaulted Capitol Police alongside a mob of Trump supporters that day, according to federal prosecutors. Trump's former head of the White House counsel's office, Don McGahn, who told former special counsel Robert Mueller during his investigation into the Russian election interference in 2016, said that he threatened to resign if Trump asked him to fire Mueller, agreed to testify in secret in front of the House Judiciary Committee, but with no explicit time frame. A recent court filing said that it would occur, quote, as soon as possible. The controversial House Congresswoman from Georgia, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who had already lost her committee assignments for professing views sympathetic to the QAnon conspiracy theory and landed briefly in hot water for the apparent planning of an American First caucus that espouses Anglo-Saxon traditions, made headlines again this week for reportedly walking after New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, yelling at her and asking why she supports Antifa, the boogeyman of the right. AOC didn't stop to talk to Greene with complaints from Democrats that an ethics investigation should be initiated to censure Greene for her conduct. Ocasio-Cortez, meanwhile, implied that Greene is mentally unwell. It wasn't just Greene that tried starting verbal altercations. One of her aides reportedly told Representative Eric Swalwell that he didn't have to wear his mask anymore on the House floor shortly after the CDC released their guidance telling fully vaccinated individuals they don't need to be masked indoors most of the time, with Swalwell yelling back at the aide that he doesn't tell him what to do. The leader of the Emergent Biosolutions manufacturing plant that messed up millions of Johnson & Johnson vaccines and had other safety violations in their facility is set to testify before the House Select Committee on COVID, which wants to also look into whether the company used its contacts with the Trump administration to unfairly receive government contracts. Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz, who is facing accusations of child sex trafficking due to the arrest and charging of his associate, former Florida Seminole County tax assessor Joel Greenberg, might have something more to worry about now that Greenberg is expected to plead guilty next week and struck a deal with federal authorities, and investigators are closing in on an immunity deal with Gaetz' former girlfriend. The allegations revolve around Gaetz and Greenberg paying 17-year-olds for sex, and specifically Gaetz taking the 17-year-old around with him on travel. Over in the Senate, Chair of the Senate Budget Committee, Bernie Sanders, said that he's getting impatient with the Biden administration's negotiations with Republicans over infrastructure, saying that the American people expect results and that Republicans are only holding up the process with partisan obstruction. Sanders made the claim that Americans don't care that something was done in a bipartisan way, just that they're benefiting from the government. The Senate Rules Committee advanced the For the People Act on a tied party line vote, moving the bill passed by the House to enact liberal voting reforms onto the floor. The bill has no chance of passing the Senate due to the threat of the Republicans using the filibuster hovering in the air. A deal between Schumer and McConnell at the start of the congressional session allowed bills to move out of committee if there was a tie between Democrats and Republicans with the 50-50 split. Even though the bill barely has a chance to pass, at least moderate Democrat Joe Manchin said he supports it for whatever it's worth. Majority Leader Schumer took his chance to criticize Republicans' actions concerning voter suppression, saying that they're only doing so because they want to spread the big lie by Trump that he actually won a rigged 2020 election. Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell hit back against Schumer, claiming that Democrats just want to take control of elections throughout the nation. Senator Dick Durbin said that he's open to a police reform proposal that was put forth before by Republican Senator Tim Scott, the only black senator from the GOP. Scott's proposal was offered last session but was torpedoed by Democrats. Even House Majority Whip from South Carolina, Jim Clyburn, known for delivering South Carolina to Biden in the Democratic primary, said that he was open to a bill that excluded ending qualified immunity. Attorney General Merrick Garland and Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas testified before the Senate Appropriations Committee this week asking for $100 million to combat domestic extremism and white supremacy, pointing to the January 6th insurrection as an invasion caused by those trying to subvert American democracy. Senator Ron Wyden wrote a letter to the Department of Defense this week that asked for information about the department's data purchasing practices, which include Americans' location data, internet browsing, and more, with Wyden alleging warrantless surveillance against Americans. A bipartisan bill co-sponsored by New York's Kirsten Gillibrand and Iowa's Joni Ernst has the support of a filibuster-proof majority to overhaul the way the military handles sexual assault allegations. The bill would take away commanders' authority to decide on the cases with their discretion, which critics have pointed out usually ends in the assailant's favor, and put the cases in the hands of independent military prosecutors to litigate. Over at the federal judiciary, the trial of lawyer Steven Donziger, who took on the oil giant Chevron in Ecuador, is now being litigated against here at home for contempt charges due to breaking house arrest started this week. Donziger won a judgment in Ecuador on behalf of farmers against Chevron to the tune of $8.6 billion, but Chevron got New York courts to void the judgment based on claims of fraud, rendering it unenforceable. Donziger spoke out against the New York judgment, putting him in house arrest, and he broke it, assailing the judge in his case as being biased against him. If Donziger is convicted of contempt, he can be sentenced to 6 months in jail. Donziger's lawyers stated in opening arguments that the deck is stacked against their client, pushing a theory that the system set Donziger up for failure. A Texas judge dismissed the National Rifle Association's bankruptcy petition, saying that it was filed in bad faith to escape a lawsuit in New York by Attorney General Letitia James to disband the gun rights organization. James went after the NRA for fraud, with allegations that members of the board, including the chief Wayne LaPierre, used donor funds to enrich themselves. The NRA filed bankruptcy in Texas in a bid to get the New York case dismissed and reform in the Lone Star State. But after Attorney General James pointed out the NRA's finances don't even warrant bankruptcy, the judge agreed. The voting technology company Dominion alleged that Sidney Powell, one of the lawyers that launched the crusade against Dominion and Smartmatic about alleged voter fraud, raided an election legal defense fund she set up and used donors' funds for her personal use, including her personal legal expenses. Even though she said that the point of the legal defense fund is to counteract liberal vote reforms throughout the nation. Finally, in national news, as the country continues its drive to vaccinate at least 70% of the population with at least one dose by July 4th, the international community is seeing snags in its efforts to combat pandemic outbreaks in their countries. Another obstacle is found in Novavax, the American biotech company still developing the vaccine, but had to pause production due to a shortage of raw materials. Census data shows that 30 million Americans are open to getting vaccinated but haven't done it, but don't call them hesitant, as they outnumber the 16 million who say they're unsure if they're going to get vaccinated, with complicated reasons why they haven't gotten their shots yet. LA County's Public Health Director Barbara Ferrer said the area can reach herd immunity by the end of July if the pace of vaccinations there continues, as more than 3 million people got at least their first dose, with just 2 million more people needing to get their first shots to get to an 80% first dose inoculation rate. The Associated Press reported on how a small group of individuals are behind the vast majority of the world's COVID disinformation, spreading lies and false information about COVID and vaccinations to drum up fear and profit, including the wealthy couple Charlene and Ty Bollinger and son of former Attorney General RFK, Robert Kennedy Jr. NPR further reported on the key 12 people behind this conspiracy theory ring responsible for creating numerous social media profiles and getting around platform bans. While different states come up with different incentives to get their citizens vaccinated, Ohio raised some eyebrows by pitching a lottery to give 5 lucky Ohioans $1 million each if they go get vaccinated, according to Governor Mike DeWine, saying that the investment is worth putting an end to the pandemic.
I did not go into this and make this decision thinking that everyone was going to say it was a wonderful idea. But I have an obligation, and that is to do everything I can to save lives, everything I can to keep Ohio moving forward. And this is one tool we had not used.
The head of the American Federation of Teachers, the nation's second largest teachers union, Rand Weingarten, called on the nation to reopen schools fully for the next school year. Almost half of the country's schools are open full-time. Following the disappointing jobs numbers from April showing an increase in hiring by only 266,000 positions, Republicans have grasped the numbers as another reason why they should come out against continuing unemployment benefits, which are historically generous in order to combat the loss of jobs from pandemic closures. 4 Republican governors said that they were immediately ending the federal $300 unemployment benefits to get people to work, although workers have re-entered the workforce but are just not settling for whatever wage is being thrown at them by employers. Biden came out this week to say that those who are unemployed and deny a job offer will lose their benefits.
We're going to make it clear that anyone collecting unemployment who is offered a suitable job must take the job or lose their unemployment benefits. There are a few COVID-19 related exceptions, so that people aren't forced to choose between their basic safety and a paycheck. But otherwise, that's the law.
A man shot and killed 6 people before turning the gun on himself at a birthday party at a trailer park in Colorado Springs, with the mass shooting revolving around a domestic dispute, as one of the victims was the shooter's girlfriend. The shooter of Asian nail salons in Atlanta, Georgia, who killed 8 people in March, 6 of which were Asian, was finally charged with hate crimes with prosecutors this week, with government lawyers also seeking the death penalty of the shooter. Minnesota State County Judge Peter Cahill delayed the trial of Derek Chauvin's police colleagues over the murder of George Floyd to next year from August, saying that the federal civil rights case grouping all of the officers together can go first, denying a defense request to move the trial out of Hennepin County in the meantime. Meanwhile, the judge that oversaw Chauvin's conviction said that aggravating circumstances worsened Chauvin's sentencing, such as abusing a position of trust and showing cruelty, and could land him in jail even longer for his murder of George Floyd. The city of Columbus in Ohio announced that they are paying a $10 million settlement to the family of Andre Hill, who was shot by a police officer as Hill was leaving his garage. The settlement is the highest Columbus, Ohio has ever paid, and the city is also agreeing to rename a gym in Hill's honor. The 3 men who were indicted in the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, who was chased and shot down while jogging in his neighborhood, all pled not guilty to hate crime, kidnapping, and felony murder charges this week. The trial is set for October. 44 attorneys general sent a letter to Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg this week asking Facebook to get rid of the idea of launching an Instagram for kids, pointing to research showing that there are privacy and behavioral concerns with introducing children to the social media platform, which can exacerbate cyberbullying and a reliance on social approval. Without saying whether Facebook was going to abandon the children's platform, a spokesman said that the company will work with regulators to safeguard children. Support for the Republican-led recall against California Governor Gavin Newsom has fallen after the entrance of celebrity Caitlyn Jenner running to replace Newsom if he's recalled. A new poll found that just 6% of California survey respondents would vote for Jenner and 52% approve of Newsom's performance, with only 36% of registered voters saying they would recall him. Arizona Republican lawmakers passed a bill that would remove voters from a list of those who get mail-in ballots, which Republican Governor Doug Ducey signed into law soon after, saying that it was a matter of election integrity even though there hasn't been evidence of voter fraud. Daytime talk show host Ellen DeGeneres said that she's ending her show after the end of her upcoming season, saying that after 19 seasons of the show, it's not a challenge anymore. DeGeneres, however, has a cloud of controversy surrounding her regarding claims of sexual assault and toxic bullying in the workplace, which she said has been just heavily coordinated against her. The NFL is being hit with new claims of systemic racism concerning how it handled the black former football players' brain injuries, which are becoming a more prevalent problem among retiring football players, and the way the league settled the lawsuit pertaining to those injuries, giving black retirees a hard time to receive payouts. The charges of systemic racism specifically circle around how the league utilizes neuropsychologists making race-based assessments to determine dementia-related claims, which start off from the assumption that black players score lower on a test determining cognitive ability compared to white players. And finally, this year's Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inducted Tina Turner, Jay-Z, the Foo Fighters, and more among the 2021 lineup. And that's it for this week's show, the 25th Hour, helping you stay on top of the 24/7 news cycle. Don't forget to rate us on Apple Podcasts, share us with your friends, and subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can email your tips and suggestions at the25thhournews@gmail.com and become a patron today for as low as $2 a month to support the show at patreon.com/the25thhournews. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.